Someone just hocked a loogie really loud. I heard it from inside. Alright. Chaver, remember I asked the other day who knows about left arms? So my left arm is still schwach, but I think maybe it's getting better. But I think I figured out the problem. I think maybe I figured out the problem. That when I'm working, I put the laptop like not at the edge of the table, but like, maybe like, I don't know, maybe like 10 inches from the edge of the table, and then I'm like leaning on my like elbows and forearms the whole day. I think maybe that's what did it. I think maybe after many years of doing this, it put a lot of pressure maybe on my shoulder. I think that so I'm experimenting with moving the computer up to the edge of the table, which means that then I'm not putting pressure on my elbows and shoulder. I'm going to try that out. I'll let you know. I might be onto something if maybe it'll be helpful for people who use computers. All right. Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying what daf are we studying today? Daf Pei Gimel, daf 83 of Masechta Gittin. Friends, we're almost done with Masechta Gittin. What do you want me to tell you? We got like 7 daf left. We got a week left. This is incredible stuff, friends. We're really moving. I mean, as I pointed out, like this is like halfway through Shas, basically. There's like different ways to, count like halfway through Shas. But if we talk about books, like, I have this 20 book Shas. This is book 10. Now you could say that after Kiddushin we'll be halfway through Shas because that's halfway through the Siddharim, right? It will be Zroim, Moed, and Noshim. But in terms of books, we're a week away from being halfway through Shas. That's crazy. I mean, I wouldn't exactly say time flies. Like this was, I think we've all earned this achievement. But can you imagine? I could still remember when we started Babylon Talmud. We're already halfway through. Incredible. The sun is shining onto the floor and deflecting into my eyes. That's going to be so annoying. Not really sure what to do about that. Oh, it's going to drive me crazy. I got to get like those blinders. All right. Friends, today we're studying Daf Pei Gimel. It's look, it's not an easy daf, but it's not a hard daf. I feel like a lot of Gittin has been kind of like this. Like it's not Yevamis or anything. It's not like really hard stuff. But some of it you got to work through. There actually is some Yevamis kind of stuff in here. So, all right, we're going to start on Daf Pei Gimel Amud Aleph at the 2 dots, about 7 lines into the page. Here we go. Daf Pei Gimel of Masechta Gittin. Tana Rabbanan, the rabbis said, after Eliezer passed away, Nichnasu Arbaz Kedim Lahoshiv Al Dvarim. 4 Tanoim, 4 of the elders came in, and they were sort of responding, asking kashas, trying to poke holes in Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, right? Of course, Rabbi Eliezer's opinion was that if a fellow says to his wife, you're divorced and you're permitted to get married to whoever you want, except for Reuven, except for Ploni. So Rabbi Eliezer's opinion was that that's okay. She's divorced. Now, we saw Machlokes yesterday. Does he say, is it by Almanas that you are divorced under the condition that you never marry Reuven? Or is it saying chutz? Is it saying you're divorced, you can marry whoever you want? Or how about this? You're divorced vis-a-vis everybody except for Reuven. With regard to Reuven, you're still married to me. Okay? So we discussed it yesterday. It's going to come up today in terms of is it machlokas by chutz or almanas? But that was Be'etzim Rabbi Eliezer's opinion that this is an acceptable get. So now, after Rabbi Eliezer died, so 4 of the elders came in to respond to Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. And these are the 4 elders: Rabbi Yossi Aglili, Rabbi Tarfin, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva. Wow, heavy hitters, Darton. Nene Rabbi Tarfin v'Omer. So this is Rabbi Tarfin's kasha. Havishahol chazo v'niseis le'ochiv shelzeh shenesra olav Umeis below banim lo nimtza ze oker dover min haTorah halamadta she'ein ze krisus. Friends, did you chop the kasha? Did you chop the kasha? The kasha is like this. The husband had said, the megarish, the divorcer, the husband had said that you could marry whoever you want, just not Reuven. Beseder. So who did she marry? Reuven's brother, Shimon. She's married to Shimon. Shimon dies. There's no kids. Now what happens? Who does she have to do yibum with? Reuven. But she's not allowed to do yibum with Reuven, because that was the whole point. She's not allowed to marry Reuven. That's the only guy he's not allowed to marry. She's not allowed to marry. So you can't do yibum. So it's basically uprooting of a mitzvah from the Torah. Because of this arrangement, you now can't do a mitzvah in the Torah, yibum. So that can't be. It can't be that this husband's divorce is able to uproot a mitzvah in the Torah. Therefore, it must be that Rabbi Eliezer is wrong. Let's read that again. So, Nene Reb Tarfon v'Amar, Reb Tarfon says, so now if this woman goes and marries Reuven's brother Shimon, Reuven, who she's not allowed to marry, she marries Reuven's brother Shimon, and Shimon dies, they don't have any children. So now she's going to be unable to do the mitzvah of Yibum with Reuven. So Be'etzim, Rabbi Eliezer, on account of Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, the husband is uprooting Be'etzim a mitzvah in the Torah. It must be therefore that this is not an acceptable divorce. To say that you can marry anybody except for Reuven, because it could lead to a mitzvah being uprooted. Then Rabbi Yossi Aglili answered, and he charged, where do we have a precedent where you have that this woman is, what does it say? Osur to Reuven, but mutter to everybody else. How could you, Look, if she's not allowed to get married to anybody, so she can't get married to anybody. If she's allowed to get married to everybody, she's allowed to get married to everybody. There's no such thing as you can marry this person, you can't marry that person. No. Either she can marry whoever she wants, or she can't marry anybody. But, and therefore, therefore, says Rabbi Yossi Aglili, she'ein zeh krisus, that this cannot be a viable divorce where she's allowed to marry some people and not others. Then Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah v'Omar. Now Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah says, krisus. Look, the pasuk says krisus. Right? It has to be a clean break. It has to be something that makes a clean break between him and her. Which means that, and we learned from there that this cannot be a proper. It's clearly not a clean break if her husband is still exerting control over her vis-a-vis who she can and cannot marry. Even after they're divorced, she's still not allowed to marry Reuven because of her original husband, so that's clearly not a clean break. And then Rabbi Akiva v'Amar. Now Rabbi Akiva gives two pshats. I'd say that the first pshat is a little bit easier than the second, but both are lumdis. But the second one, you have to use the brains a little more. But here's the first one. And then Rabbi Akiva v'Amar, says Rabbi Akiva, so what if she goes and she marries a person named Shimon, no relation to Reuven, who she's not allowed to marry. She marries some guy named Shimon. They had children, they started a family together, okay? Vinis Armlo and his Garsha, but then Shimon died, or they got divorced. And remember, she has children now from Shimon. And you know what she did? Now she goes and marries Reuven. She's not allowed to marry Reuven. That was the condition of the divorce from her original husband. Is that you're divorced as long as you don't marry Reuven. She married Shimon in the meantime. They had children. She then went and did the one thing she's not allowed to do. She marries Reuven, which then Memele invalidates the get from the original husband, which therefore means that when she was married to Shimon in sin, and all of those children are mamzerim. Lo nimtza get batel vaneh mamzerim. So won't it turn out in this case that by marrying Reuven, the get that she had from her original husband is now batal, which means that she had no right, but when she was married, when she was living with Shimon, she was living with him in sin, and those children are mamzerim. Therefore, memele, it's impossible that such a possibility can exist, that this can happen, and therefore it must be that you simply can't do this. You can't have a get where you're permitted to marry anybody except for Reuven, because you can have a situation like this where all the kids are mamzerim now. Davar acher. Now, alternatively, this is a little bit more subtle, friends. You got to use your brains here. Friends, you ready to use your brains? Get ready. If you need to, pause it. Get your brains, and then let's do this. So what if Reuven is a kohen? Now here's the interesting thing. So the original husband, divorces his wife. The condition is you could marry whoever you want. Well, the condition is you are divorced, except with regard to Reuven the kohen. With regard to Reuven the kohen, you're not divorced. You're an Eishes Ish with regard, you're divorced with vis-a-vis everybody. The one exception being Reuven. As far as Reuven the kohen is concerned, you're still married to me. Which means that she's an Eishes Ish vis-a-vis Reuven the kohen. Vis-a-vis every other man in the world, she's a grusha, she's a divorcee. Vis-a-vis Reuven the kohen, she's still married to her original husband. The original husband now dies. Which means what? Vis-a-vis Reuven the kohen, she's now a widow. Right? Vis-a-vis Reuven the kohen, she was married to her original husband the whole time. She never got divorced. Vis-a-vis Reuven the kohen. Vis-a-vis the rest of the world, she was divorced. Not vis-a-vis Reuven the kohen. I'm going to be saying vis-a-vis a lot. For better or for worse, it's vis-a-vis, 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 vis-a-vis. Okay? It's going to be vis-a-vis-ing a lot. It's going to be vis-a-vis-ing all over the place. So she was divorced vis-a-vis the whole world. She was a divorcee. Vis-a-vis Reuven the kohen, she was never divorced. She was still married to the original husband. When the original husband now dies, she's now a widow vis-a-vis Reuven the kohen. So on the one hand, I would think, okay, so let her marry. She can now marry Reuven the kohen, right? A divorcee cannot marry a kohen, but she was never divorced vis-a-vis Reuven the kohen. She was still married to her original husband vis-a-vis Reuven the kohen. Now the original husband dies, so I would think that she should be able to marry Reuven the kohen now as an almana, as a widow. But we say no. Because since she has this sort of aspect of her existence, which is that she's a divorcee with regard to everybody else in the world, so because she has this aspect of her existence, which is as a divorcee, she cannot marry Reuven the kohen, even though vis-a-vis him, she's a widow, but because of this aspect of her life where she's a divorcee, she cannot marry Reuven the kohen. Okay, let's just hold it there for now. Okay, so now, Davar Acher, first wide line, alternatively says Rabbi Akiva, if Reuven, who she's not allowed to marry, is a kohen, right? Meaning vis-a-vis Reuven, she's still married to her original husband, and they can't get married. Right? Reuven the kohen and her cannot get married. Right? She's still considered married to her original husband vis-a-vis Reuven the kohen. Umeis hamagarish, and then the original husband dies, and now vis-a-vis Reuven the kohen, she's technically an almana, a widow, but lo nimtzeis almana etzro ugrusha etzel kol adam. Well, now what happens is that vis-a-vis Reuven the kohen, she's a widow, but vis-a-vis everybody else, she's still a divorcee. The kavachomer, now we have a kavachomer. Umagrusha shehi kala. Now, if grusha, right, a grusha v'chalutza l'koyin hedjit is a lav, not nisakaris, it's a lav, and yet asura b'shvil tzad gerishin sheba, and yet she is not allowed to marry Reuven the kohen, even though vis-a-vis him she's a widow, which I would think is allowed, but because there is this divorcee aspect to her life, she's not allowed to marry Reuven the kohen. Well then, vis-a-vis everybody else, I would say she shouldn't be able to marry any of them either. Because when her husband divorced her, and she's a divorcee vis-a-vis the whole world, and she's an Eishes Ish vis-a-vis Reuven the kohen, So I would say that she can't marry any of these people, anybody in the world, because even though with regard to them she's a grusha, but there's this one guy, Reuven the Kohen, with regard to him, she's an Eishes Ish. And an Eishes Ish is more stringent than a grusha. An Eishes Ish is chenek, I believe, which is obviously more stringent than alav. And therefore, Eishes Ishi Chamura. So with regard to everybody else in the world, who she's considered divorcee vis-a-vis them, but there's this aspect though of Eishes Ish with regard to Reuven the Kohen prior to her husband dying. So lo kol shekain, certainly she should be unable to marry anybody. She can't marry Reuven the Kohen because she's still considered married to her original husband, meaning prior to his death. She can't marry Reuven the Kohen because she's still considered married to him. And what she can't marry Reuven the Kohen because she's still considered married to her original husband. Vis-a-vis the rest of the world, who she's considered a divorcee, she shouldn't be able to marry, because since she's still considered an Eishes Ish vis-a-vis Reuven the Kohen, she shouldn't be able to marry any of these people because there's like a tzad Eishes Ish to her. And then even after her husband dies, she still can't marry Reuven the Kohen because of the tzad Gerushin. So from the fact that she basically can't marry anybody, this is clearly not a proper divorce. Okay, yeah, that last opinion of Rabbi Akiva really demanded quite a bit of effort. Now Rabbi Yeshua says to all of these rabbis, who remembers the rabbis? Rabbi Tarfon, Rabbi Yossi Aglili, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, and Rabbi Akiva. Says Rabbi Yeshua to them, Amar lo and Rabbi Yeshua, Ein meshivin es ha'ari la'achar misa. You cannot reply to the lion, to Rabbi Eliezer, after he is dead, because maybe he had answers for you. You can't ask these kashas now that he's dead. Amar Rava, says Rava, Kulu islu pircha levar mid Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Says Rava, all of these arguments have holes in them, except for Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah's argument. Delays le pircha, that there's no kashas on his. Tanin Am Yochid Yochid learn in a brayse. Rabbi Yossi, says Rabbi Yossi, Ani as divrei Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah midivrei kulon. I see the opinion, the kasha of Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah more so than the rest of them. So now Rava had just said that all of them have kashas except for Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. So here we go. Here are the kashas. Omer, we said, Nenu Reb Tarfon v'Omer. So Reb Tarfon responded to Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, and he said, Harei shaholcha zo v'niseis lo'achiv shel zeh shenes olav v'meis belobonim. Well, if she goes and marries Reuven's brother Shimon, and then Shimon dies, they don't have kids, now she has to do Yibum with Reuven, but she's not allowed to do Yibum with Reuven because she's not allowed to marry Reuven. Lo nimtza zeh okadav min haTorah. So then the husband's get, which prohibited her from marrying Reuven, is on account of that we're uprooting the mitzvah of Yibum. Oker? Ihu oker? What do you mean? What do you mean he's uprooting it? The husband didn't do anything. What did he do? What's he uprooting? Elamasne lakadav min haTorah. Well, he's making a condition that ends up uprooting the mitzvah of Yibum. But masne, what do you mean he makes a condition? Mika amarla lo sagila de lo minsa balei lachuada ugavra. I don't understand. The husband didn't say to her, you go and marry Reuven's brother Shimon. She could have married anybody in the world. The conditions of their divorce allowed her to marry whoever she wants. He didn't tell her go marry, right? Except for Reuven, he didn't tell her go marry Reuven's brother. That has nothing to do with his condition that he made. She did that on her own. She married Reuven's brother. Why is it his fault? So Ella gorem lakar davar min haTorah, but he's causing it. He didn't tell her, but ultimately, at the end of the day, his terms for divorce are what ultimately led to this situation that we're in now, where there's Yibum, and the Yibum cannot be done, and therefore he's uprooting this mitzvah of Yibum. Gorem elamiata, but what do you mean he's causing it? Elamiata bas ochiv lo yisa. What, should a person never marry his brother's daughter? Shema Yamos below banim, because after all, what if he dies? He doesn't have kids. And then And then your brother, right? If a fellow marries his brother's daughter and then he dies, so now his brother can't do yibum because it's his daughter. So what? You're gonna tell me a fellow can't marry his brother's daughter because it might lead to a situation where there's no yibum? Hainu pircha, and this is the kasha. Kilu Reb Tarfon, your whole kasha is that it might end up leading to a situation where yibum can't be performed. We learned in the first Mishnah of Masechta Yevamos. You remember the first Mishnah of Masechta Yevamos? I think the first Mishnah of Masechta Yevamos, got banned from YouTube. Not banned, but I think I had to put it under like age restriction, I think, because I think it talked about ones maybe or something. Yeah, I think they didn't like that. That's why I prefer to use the Hebrew words when it comes to certain things. I wonder if they have some kind of computer program that's listening to me right now talking about how I try to get around their filters. But I guess some of the stuff in the Gemara isn't cut out for YouTube stuff. All right, Al Kaponim. So Hanu Pircha. So that's the kasha. Reb Tarfon, you're so worried about being Oker, the mitzvah of Yibum. I mean, there's 15 examples in the first Mishnah of Yevamos that you don't do Yibum. It's not that big of a deal. Uvimai. So now, according to Reb Tarfon, is Rabbi Eliezer's opinion, is he saying that chutz or almanas? Is he saying that when the husband says you can marry whoever you want except for Reuven, or you're divorced with regard to everybody except for Reuven, or is it saying you're divorced from everybody under the condition that you never marry Reuven? Now, if you say that it's talking about where he says you're divorced with regard to everybody, but you're not divorced with regard to Reuven, but in this case, there would actually be no problem. She would be allowed to do Yibum with Reuven because Rabbi Eliezer, right? Mishashari Rabbi Eliezer would permit that. The Tanya is learned by some Moder Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer admits that if a fellow divorces his wife, and he says to Ariat Mutaris L'chol Adam, you're permitted to everybody chutz miploni, you're not permitted to Reuven, you're still married vis-a-vis Reuven. But and she marries somebody else, including his brother Shimon. And then she becomes widowed or divorced. She's now no longer forbidden to Reuven. She's now permitted to Reuven. And therefore, if the condition was that you can marry, that you're considered divorced with regard to everybody except for Reuven, and then she goes and marries Reuven's brother Shimon, and then Shimon dies, she's now permitted to Reuven. She's no longer also to Reuven. Once she got married to somebody else, she's no longer also to Reuven anymore if she's widowed or divorced. I lost my place. Ela be'almanas. Rather, it's talking about under the condition, right? If he says you are divorced under the condition that you never marry Reuven, well then even if Shimon dies, she's still not allowed to marry Reuven. Okay. Nene Rabbi Yossi Aglili v'omar. Rabbi Yossi Aglili had said, Heichon motzinu osur lazeh umutur lazeh. Rabbi Yossi Aglili responded, it can't be that she is forbidden to Reuven and permitted to everybody else. Rather, ha'osur osur lakol v'amutur mutur lakol. No, it's all or nothing. If she's osur, then she's osur to everybody. Not just Reuven, to everybody. If she's permitted to everybody, including Reuven. Vilo, what, we never have situations in the Torah, in halacha, where some people are allowed to do things and other people aren't. What about Truma and Kachim? Truma and Kachim, or at least Kachim, Kohanim can eat them, nobody else can eat them. So some people can, some people can't. Be'isr Isha coming in, yeah, but we're talking about halachis of marriage, of between men and women, not Truma and Kachim. Arayis. What about Arayis? Right, a person's not allowed to, right? A woman's not allowed to marry her brother, but she can marry anybody else. So her brother, she's also to her brother. She's permitted to everybody else. The issues coming in. Yeah, but we're talking about through marriage. That's not through marriage, right? It's your sister. But here we're talking about, via, marriage and divorce. All of a sudden you're permitted to one person and not the other. Hare Eishes Ish. But what about Eishes Ish? Fellow marries a fellow. She's now permitted to him and forbidden to everybody else. Hainu Pircha. That's the kasha. Right? That the Rabbi Yossi Aglili says, Mapitom, how could it be that you have a situation where she's allowed to marry some people but not others? I mean, that's literally what marriage is. When a woman gets married, she's permitted to her husband, forbidden to everybody else. That's the kasha on Rabbi Yossi Aglili's opinion. Uvimai. And what is Rabbi Yossi Aglili talking about when it comes to Rabbi Eliezer? He's talking about chutz or almanas. Ilim about almanas. If it's talking about almanas, right, that you are divorced from me under the condition that you never marry Reuven. Well, if that's the case, Ari Hutra Etzlo Biznus. Well, while she's not allowed to marry Reuven, I mean, technically speaking, if she just has a relationship with him without getting married to him, that's not, in violation of the terms of her get, and therefore she's not entirely forbidden, right? She's not forbidden to him in that, right? She's permitted to him in that sense, technically. So, meaning Rabbi Yossi Aglili's whole thing is that how can you have she's usher to some people, mutter to other people? Well, technically she's mutter to everybody in terms of znus. Rather, it's talking about chutz, that if she says that the condition was that you're divorced except for vis-a-vis Reuven, which means that you can't have anything. You're an Ashes Ish vis-a-vis Reuven. You can't have anything to do with him. Okay, fine. Then Rabbi Akiva v'Omer. Then we had Rabbi Akiva's opinion. Of course, he gave two opinions. The first one was a little bit easier than the second one. Hopefully, the second one we won't have to kind of go through in the same level of detail the second time around. So now the first opinion with Rabbi Akiva. Then Rabbi Akiva v'Omer, Rabbi Akiva had said, Haresha al chazov v'niseis le'echod min hashuk. So if she went and she goes and so she's not allowed to marry Reuven, of course, but she goes and marries some guy named Shimon. Okay, they had a family together, children, the whole thing. And then she gets divorced from Shimon, or Shimon dies. And now she goes and she marries Reuven after she already has a family and everything like that from Shimon. And now, because she violated her divorce, that means that there never was a divorce now in the first place. She lived with Shimon in sin, and all of the kids are mamzerim. Lo nimtza get batul vaneh mamzerin. That the get is now batul, the children are mamzerin. That can't be. So therefore, clearly, it's not a kosher get. But iachi b'chulu t'nai de almanami lo tinsiv dilmalei mekaimo leile t'noya v'nimtza get batul vaneh mamzerin. Hanu pircha. Let's read that again. If that's the case, that you're concerned that, well, if she violates the terms of the get, then the children are mamzerim. Bichulu t'nai de alma nami. Then any condition when it comes to a get should be not allowed. Lo tinsiv, she shouldn't be able to get married to anybody else. Duma lo mekaima le t'nai, because what if at some point in the future the condition is violated? V'nimtza get batul vaneh mamzerin, and then the children from the second husband will be mamzerim because the get is batul. Hainu pircha, and that's the kasha. Kilu. According to this, we're concerned that she's going to violate the condition of her get, and then the children will be mamzerim. I mean, that's not limited to just this condition. That's shaykh to any condition, really. So therefore, I mean, basically what you're saying is you can never have a condition in the get, but we know you can. Uvimai. And are we talking about chutz? Or are we talking about almanas? Ilem b'chutz. If we're talking about chutz, Mishra Shai Rabbi Eliezer, as we saw a few minutes ago, Rabbi Eliezer would say that when she goes and marries Shimon, and then she gets divorced or widowed, she's now allowed to marry Reuven at this point. Mishra Shai Rabbi Eliezer would permit that. The Tanis would learn about it. Mother Hari Rabbi Eliezer admits, from Megayish's Ishto, that if a fellow divorces his wife, and he says to her, you can marry whoever you want except for Reuven. And she marries some guy named Shimon, and then she becomes a widow or divorced from Shimon. She's now permitted to Reuven. So that wouldn't be a problem if she ended up marrying Reuven after that point. Rather, it's talking about on the condition, right? If he says you're divorced on the condition that you never marry Reuven, well then even if she gets divorced or widowed from Shimon, she still can't marry Reuven. Alternatively, again, we're not going to go into the same level of detail this time around because last time around took a while. Alternatively, if Reuven is a kohen, umeis hamagarish, and then her husband now dies. So she was technically an Ashes Ish up until now, vis-a-vis Reuven the kohen. Now technically she's considered a widow vis-a-vis Reuven the kohen. And lo nimtzeis almona etzlo v'gusha etzo kol adam, and she's now considered, she's a widow vis-a-vis Reuven the kohen now. She's still a grusha vis-a-vis everybody else and all the other men. V'kal v'chomer, and we should make the following kal v'chomer, ma grusha she'ikala. If on account of the fact that she has this grusha aspect to her, which is just a lav vis-a-vis a kohen, still asura, she's not allowed to marry Ruvain the Kohen, even though she's an almana, a widow vis-a-vis him, mishum tzad gerishin shaba, because of this gerishin aspect of her existence. Eshes ish, chamura, vis-a-vis all these other men who she's considered a grusha, but with regard to Ruvain the Kohen, she's still an Eshes ish as long as the husband's still alive. Lo kol shekain, certainly she shouldn't be able to marry any of them, because there's like this, she's still to some degree considered a married woman. Uvimai. And what are we talking about here? So notice that we haven't asked the kasha on this yet, but uvemai, what is are we talking about in this case where she is are we talking about where it was chutz, right? You can marry, you're divorced vis-a-vis everybody except for Reuven the Kohen? Or are we talking about under the condition that you never marry Reuven the Kohen? If we're talking about under the condition that you never marry Reuven the Kohen, well, grusha etzlo biznus. Well, vis-a-vis Reuven the Kohen, right? It's not so, right? The whole point was that when the husband dies, vis-a-vis him, she's a widow, an almana. Vis-a-vis everybody else, she's a grusha, right? And therefore, when the husband's alive, she shouldn't be able to marry anybody else because vis-a-vis them, she's a grusha. But vis-a-vis him, he's an eshes ish. But technically speaking, if we're talking about almanas, the only thing was that she can't marry him. Technically, she could have znus with him, technically speaking, and therefore she would be considered a grusha vis-a-vis him as well. And therefore it's not so black and white that like after the husband dies, she's a almana vis-a-vis him and a grusha vis-a-vis everybody else, but while the husband's still alive, she's a grusha vis-a-vis everybody else and an eshes ish vis-a-vis Reuven the Kohen. Even vis-a-vis Reuven the Kohen, she's technically a grusha when it comes to znus. So ella bechutz. Rather, it's talking about where he says, no, you're divorced from everybody except for Reuven the Kohen. So in that case, yes, when he's alive, she is a grusha vis-a-vis everybody else and an eshes ish vis-a-vis Reuven the Kohen. And when he dies, she's a almana vis-a-vis Reuven the Kohen and still a grusha vis-a-vis everybody else. And that's kind of how you can make the kal v'chomer. Fine. So, okay, so we're talking about chutz. Now, Rabbi Akiva, I chutz svirle, losiv chutz, v'amanas svirle, losiv amanas. So now Rabbi Akiva gave two things, right? One is when she gets married to Shimon and has kids, that whole thing. And we said that that's talking about almanas. So that's talking about almanas. And then we have this case of Reuven the Kohen who says it's talking about chutz. So Rabbi Akiva, is it chutz or is it almanas? Right, Rabbi Kiva ichutz svir leilosiv chutz. So if he holds that that Rabbi Eliezer is talking about a case of chutz, we'll then bring this case of the kohen. Amanas svir le. And if he holds, for Rabbi Kiva holds that Rabbi Eliezer is talking about amanas, so losiv amanas, bring the kasha from when she gets married to Shimon and has kids. So Rabbi Akiva shmir le deikad amar chutz vikad amar amanas. Look, Rabbi Akiva understands that, look, there are those who say that Rabbi Eliezer is talking about chutz, and those who say he's talking about amanas. So man amar chutz, so if you say that he's talking about chutz, so hai pircha, so the kasha comes from the kohen situation. Uman de amar amanas, if you're talking about amanas, hai pircha, then you have the kasha from when she marries Shimon and has a bunch of kids. Fine. Okay. Umay pircha. And what's the kasha on the kohen situation, right? Meaning the situation when Reuven's a kohen, and then there's the whole thing with the eshes ish and the grusha and the almana, that whole thing. What was the kasha on that? Right? We talked about, is it chutz, is it amanas, but we didn't actually ask the kasha on it. So here's the kasha. So umay pircha. So what's the kasha? Inema iser kihuna shiny. Well, if you're gonna ask the kasha of, but look, you know, the whole kasha was that, well, if she can't marry Reuven the Kohen even when she's an almana because of the tzad gerishin that she has, well, then she shouldn't be able to marry anybody else because of the tzad eshes ish. No, that's not really, if you're going to say that's not really good kasha. We're particularly stringent when it comes to Reuven the Kohen, because when it comes to anything to do with marriage and kohanim, we are stringent. But we know that that's not the case. Rabbi Eliezer doesn't hold like that. Rabbi Eliezer nami meiser kuhuna kamaisi lei. Because after all, right, if you remember back to yesterday's daf, Pei Beis Amud Beis, when we asked, where does Rabbi Eliezer learn his opinion that she could be divorced except from Ruvain. And we said, because, well, the pasuk says by a kohen that he's right. Isha grusha me isha lo yikachu. That a kohen is not allowed to marry a grusha. And it says, even if she's only grusha me isha, even if she's only right, even if the conditions of the divorce, you're divorced from me and you're also to everybody else, still she can't marry a kohen, even if she's only divorced like that. And Rabbi Eliezer doesn't say that because we're particularly stringent, that's an exception because we're particularly stringent when it comes to Kohanim. The Rabbanan do say that we're particularly stringent, but Rabbi Eliezer doesn't seem to be concerned and say that, well, that's only a particular stringency by Kohanim. So that doesn't seem to be a thing for Rabbi Eliezer, but Rave, Krabyane, Mishum Zaken Echad Masni, yeah, but there was another opinion there from where Rabbi Eliezer learns it out, which was from V'yotzim Beis V'holcha V'hoisa Li'ish Acher Afilu Lo Yitira Ela Li'ish Acher Hayuzim Goreshes. Right, there was another passage that was Rabbi Yanai Mishum Zaken Echad, and therefore, and that avoids the whole Isser Kahuna shiny thing, and therefore you could say that Rava, who's saying that all of that Rabbi Akiva as well as Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Tarfon's opinions had kashas on them. So the kasha, according to this opinion of Rabbi Akiva, would be that, well, maybe it's particularly stringent when it comes to the kohen, and this would be according to Rabbi Yanai Mishum Zaken Echad, who learns it out from the pasuk of right by Gittin and not by the pasuk from Kiddushin, and not by the Gittin, not by the pasuk by the kohen, and therefore you kind of avoid that whole Isser Kahuna shiny thing, and you could say, and that's the kasha, you can ask Rabbi Akiva that maybe we're just particularly stringent when it comes to Ruvain the kohen. Wow. Chavra, I was telling you, this isn't the hardest daf ever, but I mean, it's not an easy, it's like, you gotta work through this daf. I mean, we're already at, I think, maybe 35, 40 minutes, and we're really kind of towards the top of Pei Gimel Amud Beis only. I think the rest of the daf really does move quicker, but I was just telling you, it's not the hardest daf, not gonna be the longest daf, but it's a daf you have to take out your brains a little bit for. Omer learn Rabbi Yoshua Meshivan Es Ha'ari Lachamisas. Now Rabbi Yoshua had said to these rabbis that, hey, hold your horses, Rabbi Eliezer is in Wellwood, don't ask kashas when he's in Wellwood. The member of Rabbi Yoshua Kavose Svirle, does that imply that Rabbi Yoshua is a Rabbi Eliezer sympathizer? That Rabbi Yoshua agrees with Rabbi Eliezer? Nami Mifrach Kaparich. He also has kashas on Rabbi Eliezer. Hachi Kamer. This is what Rabbi Yoshua was saying to them. This is what he was saying to them. Look, I also have my kashas on Rabbi Eliezer. Mihu, however, bein ledidi, bein ledidchu, both according to me. And Rabbi Yeshua, of course, was a contemporary of Rabbi Eliezer. He says, but even so, even according to me, bein ledidchu as well as according to you, ein meshivin esa'ari la'achar misa. Look, we have to show respect. We can't ask kashas on the lion after he's dead. Umay pirchad Rabbi Yeshua. What's Rabbi Yeshua's kasha on Rabbi Eliezer? The Tanya's. So I'm Rabbi Yeshua. My throat's getting dry. This is how you know it's a real lamda shadaf. When my throat doesn't get dry that often anymore, but man, when you have to exert and use your voice and you get into a daf, you lose, your voice gets dry towards the end, The voice gets dry towards the end. The Tanya of Rabbi Yeshua says, Rabbi Yeshua, Makish kod me avoya shniya lekod me avoya rishona, that we compare the period before her second marriage to the period before her first marriage to her original husband. Makod me avoya rishona, that just like before her first marriage, delo agida beinish achrina, she wasn't tied to any other fellow. So havkod me avoya shniya delo agida beinish achrina. Also, prior to her second marriage, she can't have any restrictions upon. She can't have any connection to any other men. She has to be completely disconnected and able to marry whoever she wants, right? And that's because I think Rashi points out, what does the pasuk say? Wait, what? Exactly. Right? So that's talking about the first time she gets married, and then it says right? So we talk about her getting married twice, and just so we compare the first marriage to the second marriage, and therefore just like the first marriage, she wasn't connected to anybody. She had no strings attached. So oichet, the second marriage, prior to the second marriage, she has to have no strings attached. You can't say that, you can't marry this fellow. Okay. Where am I? Gufa. We said earlier, that Rabbi Eliezer admits that when a fellow divorces his wife, and he says to her, that you're permitted to everybody except for Reuven, and then she goes and marries some guy named Shimon, and then she becomes a widow or she gets divorced. Now she's permitted now to Reuven. Once she already got married to somebody else and then divorced or widowed, she's now permitted to Reuven. Reb Shimon ben Elazar now asks a kasha, responds to Rabbi Eliezer's opinion. Where do we have a precedent that one person can make her osir and somebody else can make her mutter? That the first husband says that you're not allowed to marry Reuven, and then she marries Shimon and now she can marry Reuven. How could it be that the first husband makes her osir and the second husband makes her mutter? Vilo, well, we don't have situations like this. Yivama. There's not much Rashi on this, I don't think, but the way I understand it is that, well, what about when it comes to Yibum? When she got married to, let's call them Reuven and Shimon are brothers, so she got married to Reuven, now she's osir to everybody else. So Reuven makes her osir, Reuven now dies, and who's making her mutter to everybody else? Shimon. Let's just say Shimon does chalitza, or I guess even if they do Yibum, but then they get divorced, or whatever. So you have Reuven who makes her osir through his marriage, but she doesn't become permitted until Shimon, let's say, does chalitza with her, and now she's permitted. So Reuven's making her osir, Shimon's making her mutter. But Hasam Yavam who ka'asala, to which the Gemara says, actually, if you think about it, Shimon is the one making her osir. If there was no Shimon, if Reuven didn't have any brothers, so if Reuven didn't have any brothers, so when Reuven dies, she's a widow, she can go and marry whoever she wants. It's the fact that he does have a brother, Shimon. The fact that Shimon exists, it's Shimon who's now making her not able to marry other people, and it's Shimon who, by doing chalitza, makes her be eligible to marry whoever she wants. So actually, it is Shimon who's making her osir and Shimon who's making her mutter. Dimibal hashari v'kaima. In terms of Reuven, her original husband, he's dead. She's permitted to marry whoever she wants. But it's Shimon who's alive now. That means that actually she can't marry whoever she wants, and it's Shimon who makes her permitted to marry whoever she wants by doing, let's say, chalitza. Darim, okay, but what about a neder? The neder also, a fellow says, I'm not eating any pizza, okay, or all pizza is forbidden upon me, like a korban. And yet a chacham can do ataras nedarim. So the fellow is making the pizza asur, the chacham is making the pizza mutter. Ha'am Rabbi Yochanan in chacham mater klum, el b'charata. But Rabbi Yochanan says that the chacham isn't being matir the neder. He finds a pesach, he finds an opening to the neder. He says, wait, did you really realize that if you can't eat pizza, you'd be so unhappy? And he says, no, I didn't realize that I'd be so unhappy if I can't eat pizza. And he says, well, you see, you didn't really mean it in the first place. So it's not the chacham who's being matir, he's finding a pesach or charata. I think, are those two separate things? Pesach, I think maybe pesach and charata maybe are two separate things. Now I don't remember. But basically you're saying that the neder was not really valid in the first place. Hari afara sabal. But what about if a husband is mefer the neder of his wife? The isha noderis, that the wife makes the neder val mefer, and the husband is being mefer the neder. Hosam could do pinchas mishmei derov. But that's like a Pinchas, the name of Rava, the Omer Pinchas, Mishmei de Rava, called Noderis, Adas Baile, Noderis. That when a wife makes a neder, she makes a neder, assuming the consent of her husband. If he doesn't consent, so, okay, there goes that. The neder was never valid in the first place because he didn't consent. So there also, he's not being matir the neder, he's basically making it like the neder was invalid all along. Neder Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah v'Omar, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah's opinion was, and this was the one that I think we read. Where did we see? Did we read Rabbi Yossi yet, or was Rabbi Yossi? Rabbi Yossi was way earlier. Yeah. Okay, fine. But Rava had said that all of them are kashas except for Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. What did Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah say? Then Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah v'Amar Krisus. The pasuk says that Rabbi V'nosan Sefer Krisus V'nosan Biyado, It has to be krisus, davar hakoris, beino leveno. It has to be something that makes a clean break between them. Halamato shein ze krisus, which means that in this case, where she's still not allowed to marry, right? She can't get married to Reuven, it's not a clean break. For Rabbanan krisus may avdile. What did the rabbis do with this pasuk that Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah quotes of krisus? They needed lichdetani, like we learned in the Brisa, areza gitech amenas shalotish diyain. This is your get under the condition that you never drink wine anymore. That you never go to your father's house anymore. Einzo krisus. This is not a clean break. Shloshim yom areza krisus. But if he says it's only for 30 days, so then that's acceptable. Okay, fine. Apparently that's learned out from krisus. V'idoch mikaris krisus nafka. Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah learns it out. Well, it could have just said karis, but it says krisus, so he learns out both, right? Okay, I'm not super sure what the difference between Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah's and meaning what's really the difference between if you can never drink wine or if you can never marry a certain person. I guess one is specific, directly tied to the divorce, whereas the other one is tied to a condition, maybe. I don't know. And v'idach, yeah, maybe that's the difference. One is saying like your divorce itself is limited because it's it doesn't apply to Reuven, whereas over here I guess we're saying it's a full divorce, just you have this condition that never goes away. So that's what the rabbis learn out from krisus. Whereas Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah learns that, well, it could have just said kares, but it says krisus, so therefore we learn out two things. V'idach kares krisus lo darsha, but the rabbis don't learn that drasha of kares krisus, and they only learn out these conditions, but not for the opinion of Rabbi Eliezer, or the limit, or the fact that Rabbi Eliezer, the kasha and Rabbi Eliezer. Fine. Oh, my Rav says, Rav Areza Gitech Amnashlo Tishtayain Kol Yumei Chayai. This is your get under the condition that you never drink wine as long as I'm alive. Ein Zeh Krisus, that's not a good get. Kol Yumei Chayai Ploni, but if you don't, right, this is a get under the condition that you don't drink wine as long as so-and-so is alive. Harei Zeh Krisus, this is a kosher get. Ma'ishna Chayai Ploni, I understand, why is it a kosher get as long as so-and-so is not alive, you can't drink wine? Well, because he's not saying that you can never drink wine again, he's just saying you can't drink wine as long as so-and-so is alive. If he dies, you can now drink wine. But why is it any different than when he talks about his own life? If he dies before she does, he's dead, she can now drink wine. So no, if he says that you can no longer drink wine for the rest of your life, well then that's a problem because she's now bound to him for the rest of her life. But but she says that you can't drink wine for the rest of my life, or for the rest of so-and-so's life, that's okay, because if they die before she does, she can now drink wine, so she's not bound by it for the rest of her life, per se. But Rav asked a kasha from Rav Nachman, Ayom iat ishti ulumachar at ishti. What if he says, today, you're divorced from me, but tomorrow, you're my wife again? Mao, tibayr Rabbi Eliezer, tibayr Rabban. It's a kasha both according to Rabbi Eliezer and according to the rabbis. We're not sure what their opinions would be. Tibayr Rabbi Eliezer, we can ask the kasha according to Rabbi Eliezer. Ad kan lo ka'amar Rabbi Eliezer hasam. Look, Rabbi Eliezer says that you can make the a condition that you're divorced, but not vis-a-vis Reuven. El dilaman de kashari laolam. Because in that case, okay, fine. It's kind of a weird stipulation because she's still now, right? She's not allowed to marry Reuven, so he's saying who she's allowed to marry and who she can't. But whoever she is allowed to marry, she can marry forever. Whereas over here, but over here, she's saying she's fully divorced, but only for one day, and then it ends the next day. So maybe that's a different story. Maybe Rabbi Eliezer would say that's not okay. Or maybe no. Maybe like you can make these kind of controlling weird conditions where like the divorce is still limited. So Tibai the Rabban, you can also ask a kasha according to Rabban. Ad kan lo kam Rabban hasam el lo paska mine legam. Maybe the rabbis had an issue with you're divorced from everybody except for Reuven because the divorce is not complete. Aval hacha kim the paska, but over here, once he says you're divorced completely from me for today, well, that's it. She's completely divorced, and she once the marriage is off for one day, it never comes back. I mean, what's bringing it back? If you're completely divorced, you're completely divorced. The next day, what's happening? Is Makadesh her again? I mean, okay, it's a different story, but short of that, I mean, she's fully divorced. So maybe they would say this is okay. But the Baya, the Pashta, so after asking the Kasha, Rava answered the kasha. Mistarva bein Rabbi Eliezer, bein Rabbanon, came the Paska, both according to Rabbi Eliezer and according to the rabbis. Look, if he says you're divorced tomorrow, that's it, you're divorced. What do I mean to tell you? You're not coming back the next day. You're already divorced. Friends, that was Daf Pei Gimel of Masechta Gittin. We really had to work through that daf. It's not an easy daf. We asked kashas, and Rabbi Eliezer opinion 4 kashas. We asked the fear kashas from Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tar, from Rabbi Yosef Glili, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah. Rava had said that all of the kashas have problems with them. He pointed out the problems with them. And that was kind of the main gist of today's daf. That was Daf Pei Gimel of Masechta Gittin. I'll see you tomorrow for Pei Dalet. Peace out.